we don't just get to walk away from the things that we experience, and we see a lot of everyday people's worst day of their entire lives. And for us, that can just be like, you know, a random Tuesday.
Hey, it's Julie. Welcome to Uncomfy. You know, a lot of us are struggling right now with how to stay open to other people when we seem to be living in different realities. I feel like I'm always walking on eggshells, but I also don't want to give up on connection. Well, this is a podcast about staying with the moments we usually want to escape, the awkward ones, the tense ones, the ones that can actually teach us something. So let's get uncomfy.
I really had to try to remain as calm as possible because it could be nothing, it could be everything. And I needed to keep my composure and a calm head in a crisis.
Friends, I want you to meet Erin Nugent. She's a crisis counselor. She's a former Australian police detective, as you might be able to detect from her accent. She is now a life and wellness coach who helps first responders and their families navigate the mental and emotional weight of that job. And she also has a podcast along those lines. It's called I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. Erin, welcome to Uncomfy.
Thank you for having me, Julie. I appreciate it.
So, wow, you are a former police officer. Also, your husband is a firefighter.
That's right.
So what was that moment when, what was happening that led you to sort of be like, this could be nothing or it could be everything and I got to keep my calm head here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been married to my husband now for 12 years, but this was a few years ago. We had two small children and he was on shift. And I was about to go to bed and I think I grabbed my phone to, you know, put it on silent, do not disturb, charge it, all that kind of fun stuff. And a message from him popped up. And he's not one to keep in a huge amount of contact at that time of night when he's on shift, you know. And so I checked it and it said, okay, don't freak out, ... but I've been taken to hospital. So
never good when it starts with a don't freak out.
Exactly. So you're going to always do the opposite. But so obviously my head just started ticking over in terms of, okay, how much is my life about to change? And obviously
12 years, was this the first time that this had happened where you'd gotten sort of, because every day, every night, or every time he goes on shift, there must be a little bit of like, ooh, I hope everything goes okay.
You know, there very much is. There's a certain amount of, I mean, I don't refer to it as anxiety. I think it's apprehension, but it's also just, it's awareness. It's awareness that the fact that, you know, my partner does at times, incredibly dangerous job for a profession. He's gone for 24 hours twice a week. And so in you know, the time when he's gone, everything else is on me. So I have to sit in that, but I also, you know, have to not let your thoughts run away from you, because otherwise what kind of existence would that be? So I have to trust that he is proficient at his job. I have to trust that he has a really great crew of people around him, which he very much does. And you can't control everything, but you have to make peace with that.
So he was taken to the hospital that night.
He was, yeah. So they were fighting a fire where there was, I don't know if it was like a factory or some kind of location like that. And it contained some sort of like drone technology and a whole bunch of like lithium batteries. So similar to when there's like the electric vehicle fires, they're incredibly difficult to put out because there's a high chance of reignition. But also when they catch on fire, they emit these incredibly toxic gases.
So he was poisoned?
I mean, that's like I guess a strong word, but basically, you know, they all just like inhaled some of that, toxic gas, and to the point where kind of everyone on scene was sort of clocking that a bunch of them weren't looking all too great. So, being the typical first responders that they are, a little bit of no, I'm fine. But I'm trying to think how many of them. I think at least 4 or 5 were transported to the hospital as a result. And so I'm sort of, madly texting him back at, just after midnight being like, okay, can you give me a little bit more details, babe? Obviously, as a former investigator, I'm all about the details. And I'm like, are you burnt? Are you, what, give me something. So I think they just gave him some oxygen, checked them out, and was sort of like okay to go after a few hours. But it was that sort of that sinking feeling that as the spouse of, a responder or anyone who does any kind of job where there's, a sense of an inherent risk, it is that communication that you are hoping that you never get. And obviously we were incredibly fortunate, on that occasion, but I know that that's not the reality for a lot of people in my situation.
Yeah. I think everybody is so grateful for first responders who are willing to, and their families, I guess. We don't always think about that, but, first responders and their families who are sort of willing to live with that constant uncertainty, so that we can feel confident that in our direst moment, they're going to be there to help us out, right? What do you think people like me, then, who is not a first responder or partnered up with one, what do you wish we understood about, the life that you and your partner lead?
I think the thing that gets forgotten or mistaken is we're also just people. We at the end of the day, we are humans. We are, going back to our husbands, our wives, our kids, our, families. We, many first responders have second jobs and second careers as well. We don't just get to walk away from the things that we experience. And unfortunately, your worst day, we see a lot of everyday people's worst day of their entire lives. And for us, that can just be like, a random Tuesday. And that's just one job. So I did 8-hour shifts. Many first responders, can do 10, 12. My husband does 24-hour shifts, and some firefighters do 48-hour shifts at a time. So you can imagine the amount of accumulated, stress, not only psychological, emotional, physical, in, sleep deprivation, trauma exposure. It all plays a role and impacts them in pretty significant ways, and we very much sign up for it, but no one knows how they will cope in the aftermath. You know what I mean? Like you can't do a test run of what it's going to look like when you see a dead body for the first time, or when you have to extract someone from a vehicle, or you face an angry person with a weapon. Like you can be trained, but you never know at the end of the day how your nervous system is going to respond when you are thrown into that, stress reaction, fight or flight scenario. So
how well are first responders equipped? I guess maybe it depends on the department, it depends on the field, it depends on the country. I don't know, but just kind of broadly speaking, the folks that you work with, maybe primarily in the United States, are first responders equipped to also sort of acknowledge and deal with that trauma? Because I know from the outside, we're kind of just like, wow, you guys must be like stone cold, ice in your veins, like nothing bothers you, But you're telling me they're human, so how are they dealing with this trauma?
I mean, the saddest statistic I can share with you is that we lose more to suicide than in the line of duty every single year. So not well. We are trained to do the job, and no one trains us how to cope with the job in the aftermath. And so that is part of the work that I do, and many of my connections and friends and colleagues doing similar work by sharing, our own experiences, providing psychoeducation, helping to find culturally competent resources. So, clinicians, coaches, therapists, programs that are not only tailored to first responders and understand their unique culture, but also understand how trauma impacts people.
Are first responders okay to even admit that they, like that was rough, or like I'm struggling with what we just saw or what we just responded to? Can they talk about that with their colleagues?
So again, that is something that is getting better. And that is part of the conversations that we are, learning to have and navigate. You learn through experience and through exposure to like tuck it all down, because you have to, because you can't be, having an emotional breakdown on scene sort of thing. It would be completely inappropriate and ineffectual for you to be able to do your job. So we do what's needed to be done in the time. But in the aftermath, what can happen is a lot of first responders don't know how to switch it back on. They don't know how to process those emotions because no one's ever taught them. That's what's leading to, people coping in maladaptive ways with drinking, drugs, infidelity, all that kind of thing. And ultimately, unfortunately leading to suicide a lot of the time. So that's why, even these kinds of conversations are really important, because people have to learn to not avoid uncomfortable things. They have to learn to sit in it to be able to process it. Because if you constantly avoid it, then you learn through that negative reinforcement that, I feel better in the interim, but it doesn't help you out in the long term. So, sort of something that I talk about a lot and help, my clients through is, I call it like the 3 Ps. It's about being, proactive, engaging with things in a preventative way, and also being really purposeful about it. So engaging in practices that help regulate their nervous system and pulling them out from that, sympathetic response to the parasympathetic nervous system. Understanding yourself.
What does that look like? Meditation or breathing or sleeping?
Yeah. So many different kinds of things. It's mindfulness meditation, breath work, grounding exercises, and they're just kind of, in the interim, but obviously, maintaining a really good sleep schedule, or trying to, as much as you can, focusing on those core basics, your sleep, your nutrition, hydration and breath, all that kind of thing. Going and seeking external resources to be able to talk it out in a comfortable way, because it doesn't leave you if you don't finish processing it. It can get stored in the body. It can end up causing, the psychosomatic, physiological symptoms. A lot of inflammation and stuff like that can often be the result of unprocessed, incidents, trauma, or that kind of thing.
Talk to us a little bit from the partner, the spouse perspective, I guess, here. What, when your husband comes home from a shift, I mean, you have to assume that he experienced something traumatic, unless all they did was cook and sleep, right? Which maybe happens, but quite rarely on one of those 24-hour shifts.
Not on his department, unfortunately.
So, what is your job, or what do you even feel like you can do to sort of help facilitate the processing and the decompressing?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think it's more so the conversations that need to happen. Can't happen in that moment when he's walking through the door after a shift. It kind of has to happen prior to that, in terms of, what does support look like, and how do you need me to show up for you? What really helps you when you have had a tough shift? And what's going to, help one is going to be vastly different to another. My husband's 15 years older than me. He's a little more old school, a little more stoic, and I think he's always kind of gone under the impression and the old school mentality of you don't bring it home, you don't come home and talk about it, all that kind of thing. And I guess, more so over the last probably, 4 to 5 years, we've had to work on ourselves and gotten better, because the realization for him is you bring it home whether you realize it or not. You bring it home in your emotional reactivity. You bring it home in your demeanor. All I have to do is take a 2-second look at him, and I can tell what kind of a night he's had. So for him, very much, he just kind of wants to be left alone. So don't ask too many questions. Let him engage with our 2 young boys before they go to school or whatever. And then just give him his peace and, silence, but not isolation. And we also sort of have a bit of a joking scale of, how bad of a night that he had. So it's not about giving me any kind of details, but it's effectively letting me know, my battery is here. Or it's oh no, you know what, it wasn't too bad. So I'm at about 50% capacity. But developing some kind of code, and for us, me being a former first responder, him still one, ours, tends to be a little on the dark humid side. But being able to establish that, then it just means from one very limited conversation, I know exactly where he's at. So being able to navigate that beforehand So then like if he, has had a challenging shift, then he just kind of can just be left alone and everyone is aware and we just kind of get on with our day and he can re-engage when he's ready.
So, Erin, I know just a tiny bit about your story, but obviously you're from Australia. You're in the States now. You came when you married your husband, I think, who's American. Yeah. I'd love to just know, sort of, if you rewind for us, when you became a police officer, why? Like, what drew you to the first responder path?
So I was very young and I guess it was just, I always wanted to help people. People think of police as always doing the awful things, arresting people, and obviously that is a significant part, but you end up doing a lot more other things where you interact with the public in sometimes a really positive way. So I found that to be just what spoke to me, and I became a police officer when I was 22 years old, and I did it for just shy of 9 years, and I loved it, and I would never have had any intention of leaving until a handsome American firefighter swooped in and swept me off my feet. But I use my first responder experience to inform me, not only the work that I do with helping clients, but it also informs me of being able to support my husband and understanding the role that he does, and he loves his job. Constantly is always like, no better job in the world. So it's how I can sort of, I guess, sit in any kind of discomfort or apprehension about the fact of, either whether he's going to come home at all or what he's going to be like when he does come home.
I'm really grateful that there are people who find meaning in this kind of work, because I'm glad that those people exist, and I know it's not me. I really appreciate you sharing some of your insights with us today, Erin. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Erin Nugent is a former Australian police officer and detective. She now dedicates her work to supporting first responders as a life and wellness coach. She's also host of a podcast called I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, and a radio show called Holding Space on the Thin Line Rock Station. And thank you for getting uncomfy with us today. I'd love to hear your story of leaning into discomfort, maybe in order to process something or to deepen a relationship or to shape an experience into something more beneficial for you. Email your story to uncomfy@byu.edu or find us on social media to continue the conversation. We are at uncomfy.podcast on Instagram. Uncomfy is a BYU Radio podcast. Samuel Benson produces it. The team includes Maggie Mathis and Abby Karras. Our theme music was composed by Kelsey Ney. I'm Julie Rose. Can't wait to get uncomfy with you again next week. Hey friends, quick recommendation for your podcast queue. Do you remember that movie that you had on VHS or DVD that you watched so many times it wore out? Well, movies didn't just entertain us, they shaped who we are. And there's a new BYU Radio original podcast called Voiceover, Movies That Move Us. I think you're really going to like. Film studies PhD Heather Bigley hosts the show. She has guests on, and they talk about movie moments that shifted perspective, that sparked self-reflection or stirred their souls. Plus, they give recommendations for movies you might want to check out. You can listen to Voiceover, Movies That Move Us, now on BYU Radio or anywhere you find your podcasts.